This is Kailey, and in this video she's going to be removing the radiator from her 1966 Mustang. The first thing she needs to do is disconnect the negative battery terminal from her battery. It's just good practice. It prevents the possibility of shorts. Okay, the next thing Kailey's going to do is loosen up her alternator so that the fan belt can be gotten off. All she has to do is loosen that bottom bolt and loosen the top bolt. Neither one needs to come out. And then she'll get a little bit of help from Dad just to get that alternator to swing in as much as possible. And then I was explaining to her that you can sort of derail the fan belt to get it off. And then you just have to work it over the fan blades and take it out. Okay, and the next thing she's going to do is start taking her fan off. There are 4 bolts that go through the fan and that long spacer. So the bolts are pretty long. They go all the way to where I'm pointing there. So you can't actually take them all the way out, but you can thread them as far as they'll thread out, and then you can work the whole thing with the bolts off all at once. Then it's time to drain the radiator, and this is done by spinning it counterclockwise, but the drain cock will actually go in towards the radiator. What happened in this case is nothing came out, and so we thought, well, maybe we need to take the cap off to get it to drain, and then we looked inside the radiator and oh my goodness, there wasn't even any fluid visible. That didn't mean there was no fluid in the radiator, but there wasn't any visible, so we definitely had it too low. Why was nothing coming out? It's because this radiator is so old and gunked up that, you know, the drain cock was clogged. So Kailey poked some kind of little wire in there and a little bit started dribbling out. So at that point, it was time to go ahead and start taking off her radiator hoses. She started by taking the clamps off of the lower radiator hose. And then the hose didn't want to come off. It was stuck on pretty good. So sometimes you have to use a knife and cut the hose a little bit to get it to come off. Now she's going to grab that hose and take it off, and here comes the flood.
Oh my god.
Wow, that's really nasty looking. That's the second time in like 2 days we've seen just really nasty fluids come out of this car.
Obviously, having a pan underneath everything turned out to be really important. Okay, so now she's going to go ahead and take off the upper radiator hose. There are 2 clamps to undo. And a little bit of twisting and wiggling, and the hose comes right off. The lower radiator hose was stuck to the water pump pretty good, so again, she ended up having to use a knife. It's pretty important when you're using a knife to try not to score the metal underneath, because you don't want to create a leak by creating a deep scratch. But finally the hose was willing to come off, and as you can see, it was kind of rusty looking inside. So the next thing that she needed to do was go ahead and get the 2 transmission lines off. This is a situation where it's good to have 2 wrenches, one to hold the part you don't want to turn and one to hold the part you do want to turn. Although she opted not to do that on the second transmission line and got away with it this time. Okay, so that's everything that was attached to the radiator now disconnected. So now she could go ahead and start undoing the 4 bolts that actually attach the radiator to the car. Watch the lower right hand corner of the radiator. It actually comes apart because this radiator is so old and rotten. But then she does get it to come out. She's got to lift it way up and over the grill. Before we recycle it for about $10, there are a couple of fittings that need to be salvaged off the old radiator. These are fittings for the transmission cooling lines. And then this is one of those while you're in there things. There's a radiator bypass hose that is much harder to get to when the upper radiator hose is installed. So I recommend replacing this hose at this time. It isn't that expensive and it's much easier to do at this point in the project. To avoid the Chinese finger puzzle effect, it helps to push up on the hose from the base. Once this hose pops off, disassembly is complete. New radiator installation is covered in a separate video. Comments and questions are always welcome, and they help other viewers. Thank you for watching.
What if I touched both terminals at once? Would
Do
I
it.
get shocked? No!
You want me to?
Yes.
Things dumb people do. I'm a terrible actor. All right.